Military service is a very strange profession. In some cultures, the military profession, which is a very noble profession, is also associated with morality. However, the Russian army acts against this situation. Recent reports shows that Russian army has fallen into a difficult situation. Hello, viewers of The Pioneer. I hope you're healthy and well. In recent days, we often bring developments related to the Russian army to our agenda. The damage caused by the offensive operations of the Ukrainian army and the Russian army is growing. This situation also leads to an increase in the need of the soldiers in the Russian army. So how will the Russian army complete the need for soldiers? We reached a report in which we found very interesting answers to this question, especially in these days when nationalism is quite strong. Every nationality wants to fight for their own nation, right? However, there is no such situation in the Russian nation. Despite all the nationalist currents, Russian citizens do not want to fight for the Russian army, even though they are proud to be Russian. This situation caused Russian leader Vladimir Putin to find a very different method for new recruitments. So what is this method? Let's take a look at this whole thing together. As The Pioneer, we continue to make a great effort for Russia-Ukraine war reports. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. You can also give us your opinion about the content in the comments and share with us your video ideas that you want to see on our channel. I read all your comments. Let's start if you're ready. The Pioneer reports. A group of international independent researchers recently conducted a critical research. As a result of this research, a very critical development related to the Russian army has emerged. According to the report of the researchers, the losses of the Russian army have reached an unbearable level. To compensate for these losses, the Russian army targeted a new audience. This mass is called the vulnerable population group by a group of independent researchers. So what is the vulnerable population? Let's put it this way. People without any material security, stateless, i.e. migrants, bankrupt businessmen, debaters, unemployed. We can extend this list further. From this point of view, we can clearly see the situation that the Russian army is in. It is quite critical for the Russian army as it is dependent on this vulnerable population. According to our estimates, the Russian army promises something to these people. For example, job opportunities for the unemployed, the promise of paying debts for the in-debt, to the promise of citizenship to the stateless and migrant people. In order for these promises to be realized, the Russian leadership has a condition, that is to fight in Ukraine for these imperial goals of the Russian army. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? Probably the Russian leadership was also quite simple when it made these promises. But here is the situation. The chances of fulfillment of these promises are very low. Allegedly, Ukrainian intelligence officials have also reached very critical information about this new move of the Russian army. Anton Grashchenko, an advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry, recently shared a post on social media which confirms these allegations. Ukrainian Interior Ministry advisor Anton Grashchenko used the following statements in his statement. There is a new recruitment plan in the Russian army. Russian citizens with debts are now under pressure to join the army. For this reason, all data on those with credit debts have been transferred to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Debtors will now be driven into the army with the threats, either pay debt or go to war. Basically, a debtor is a borrower who is about 30 years old, has a secondary higher education, has a family, and has to earn a living. This requires not only a high income, but also benefits such as credit freezes, concessionals, mortgages, and etc. The Ministry of Defense seduces Russians with all this. According to reports, the losses of the Russian armed forces have increased considerably in recent days. This situation forces the Russian administration to take new measures on this issue. In the case we have just mentioned, it is one of the measures taken in this regard. But this is not the only measure taken by the Russian army. The Russian army is preparing to employ people of other nationalities in the Russian army. According to the recent reports, the Russian army is about to make an agreement with Cuba. With this agreement, Cuban citizens are being smuggled to Russia to be employed in the Russian army through an international human trafficking network. Look, This is a seemingly simple but very serious issue because here the Russian leadership is committing several offenses in a complicated way. There are many reports that this is happening right now. It has not yet been confirmed. With the arrival of the image from the front line, another crime committed by the Russian army will be revealed. However, let us also state the following. The situation is not the only that the crime committed by the Russian army. It is very critical in terms of revealing the losses of the Russian army. It is also claimed that there is a new decision taken by the Russian army regarding the recruitment of new soldiers. According to the allegations, for the first time in the Russian army, female soldiers will be officially assigned. This is information that clearly reveals the situation we have just mentioned, because the Russian army made such a decision for the first time after the invasions of Ukraine. The active recruitment of women in this war, which has left nearly 2 years behind, is a turning point of the Russian army. A depleted power of the Russian army is now causing Russian women to enter the war. So when will Russian women be seen at the front? We don't know this yet. However, we can say that this process may accelerate with the winter conditions and the situation in the Russian army become more difficult. The only exhaustion in the Russian Federation is not the only army. Likewise, there are depletion in every field of Russia. In our previous reports, we talked about the labor force in Russia leaving Russia. Nowadays, there are remarkable developments in the different sectors. According to the latest reports, significant activities in Russia are about to stop. According to Nikolai Patrushev, a senior Russian security official, the number of scientists in the Russian Federation has decreased by about 25% in the last 20 years. This decline has accelerated during the war in Ukraine, but Patrusev's statements are as follows. A serious obstacle to achieving technological independence is the lack of qualified scientific engineers and labor personnel. The total number of personnel engaged in research and developments in Russia has fallen by a quarter in the last 20 years. Of course, this number increased considerably during the war in Ukraine, especially when mobilization was announced. Many Russian scientists fled to Georgia, Finland, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia to avoid becoming Russian soldiers. In recent months, Valentin Parman, vice president of the Russian Academy of Science, told the state news agency that Russia has lost about 50,000 scientists in the last 2 years, about that no other country had seen such a decline. As can be understood from the reports, the Russian army is falling into a more difficult situation day by day. This is also openly admitted by the Russian sources. So how long will this difficult situation continue? Of course, it will continue as long as Putin's presence in the Russia continues. So what do you think? Do you think the new methods of the Russian army will work? Will the Russian army be able to compensate for its losses? Will these compensation methods work? Let me know in the comments. I read and care about all your comments.